the climate, I think since it's an informal discussion and I want to cover as much as possible, maybe I'll for the first 10, 12 minutes or up to maximum 15, I'll just talk about the COP28, the recent one in Dubai. And then on the second part, I wanted to focus more on the, okay, what next? How do we do just transition? How do we push for fossil fuel phase out? What do we do with corporations? Because for Global Justice Now, our main campaign is, given the government that we have, the last 5 years, with 3 prime ministers and a series of disturbing cabinet members, most of the argument we get is that there's no money for just transition. There's no money for fossil fuel phase out because transition will cost a lot. So how do we argue against that when governments say there's no money? So I think on the Dubai COP, the 28th meeting of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I know Kevin was also there, so you can also, you're welcome also to give a comment. This is one of the most controversial COP, given the fact that the president of the COP is not just a minister in his country, so he is also, he does have some remit since he's holding the environment portfolio, but at the same time he's the chief executive of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, and then also he also founded Masdar. Masdar is a renewable energy company, and for many who don't know it, the arena. This is it's renewable energy. It's comparable to a UN entity on renewable energy. Is also based in the UAE. So it is quite complex, and there's a lot of contradiction there, because for those who are following corporate power, there's a big difference if we tackle a state-owned enterprises. And there's a big difference when you tackle people or personalities who are heading a state-owned enterprises and who are also officials. So I've learned a lot working in China on that if you're facing an official who have 2 hats, or being a government official and being a CEO, then that's a different story. And many in the campaigning world, in NGOs and the climate justice movement are not familiar to this. So I'm just saying this because it will play a big role, especially in the next COP, when it will be in Baku. Baku is interesting because it's the first experiment on acquiring or nationalizing oil assets. So it's an experiment of Russia before, when it was still a part of the USSR, wherein they took the asset without compensation. So they nationalized the asset, and that will, of course there are many speculations. Will Baku be worse than the previous one, Egypt? We don't know. But for me, for those that are looking at the climate, energy, minerals perspective, it is interesting to look at it not just on the climate perspective, but also on what's the plan. What's the plan on increasing renewables in the energy mix? So it's important to look at that, and then how are they? What's their plan in that transition? So going back to Sultan Dr. Ahmed Al Jaber, beforehand, I was quite interested in looking at his background. So how did he set up Masdar? What is the increase on the renewable energy in the energy mix of the UAE? Because of course, a country that relies, whose economy achieves such height on an oil asset, will not easily give up or phase out fossil fuels. So what's the plan? And what's the percentage of renewable in the energy mix? And then also, of course they are doing double talk, and they're saying that they also support renewables, because if you look at what their plan is, they're talking a lot about blue hydrogen, which at this point, maybe in 20, 30 years, it might be something, but at this point, you still use fossil fuels to turn water into energy. And many of these projects, be it CSS, or be it carbon storage, capture and storage, or be it blue hydrogen, the question here is more on how you make it green in the process. But of course, the extraction is still there. It's still fossil fuels. They might manage to make the process like green, but it will still be fossil fuels. So that's a big question. And my organization is also part of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which during the Dubai COP ended up with 12 countries supporting the treaty. And this is something that I would like to discuss at the end as well. There's also that factor that since Egypt, since the Sharm el-Sheikh, when they mentioned about loss and damage, because I also invested a lot of time following that process, there were 5 negotiations, and in the end, it ended up with very questionable results. One of which is that the World Bank will be the interim host. And since I remember during my time in Focus, we were looking at all these IFIs, and we questioned the fact that in their governance, in their way of doing things, they don't have the capacity to do grants, because they're used on loan pushing. So that's how they get their money. They are loan pushers. But with loss and damage, that's a different game. And when the 5th meeting of the loss and damage happened, there was that big question about the hosting by the World Bank. Of course, we got the surprise. So there's a mix that on the opening day, it was approved. Normally, things like this will be approved at the end day, when you don't know if will this meeting end on the supposed end, or will there be 1 or 2 days extra, and normally it's 1 or 2 days extra. So it was approved, so loss and damage is there, the fund is now operational, but then the question of what amount of money is in it. It's now 700 million, maybe 800, but that's not enough, because even the many studies before Sharm el-Sheikh, the commensurate amount of money needed to at least have a fund that countries, especially climate vulnerable countries, can go to, a minimum 250 billion from 2030. So 700 definitely is not enough. And it is also laughable that historic and huge emitter like the US put 17 million. 17 million is more like what? 5 windmills in the UK. 5 windmills. It's laughable. It's actually maybe not laughable because it's not a joke. It's the other countries should be insulted that for a country with such huge emission you give 17.5 million. And then and then at the same time put 1.3 trillion on fossil fuel investment until 2050. So there's that hypocrisy of countries, just 5 countries actually, the US, the UK, Norway, okay, I'm forgetting about the other 2. Norway, it will come back to me, or it's on my blog. It will be the blog. Just those 5 countries will increase the fossil fuel investment by 2050 by 51%. So if we're talking about really commensurate climate action, then you should not increase your fossil fuel investment. So there's that outrage at the appointment of Al-Jaber. There is that outrage that that there will be a lot of deals on the side. There's a Guardian research that Al-Jaber as president will use the COP to have all those negotiations and energy deals. So both either oil or gas or renewables. And there's also the fact that there's 2,456 lobbyists. So that's more than 5 times the corporate lobbyists in Sharm el-Sheikh. You have 640 plus in Sharm el-Sheikh. And of these, you have the 5 oil majors, you have the CEOs of BP, Shell, Total Energies, ExxonMobil. Just these big 5 brought 65 lobbyists, and except Chevron, their CEOs. And it is bad enough that in Europe, these oil majors have more meetings in Brussels with the European members of the European Parliament than their constituents. I mean, meaning the MEPs and the MPs, members of Parliament, have less meeting with their constituents than meetings with the oil majors. And also, apart from them, Eni, which is an Italian company, and Equinor, which is a Norwegian company, brought 24 and 14 staff. So it's really full of oil lobbyists, the meeting. And the EU, especially the German chief negotiator, went on, the press conference said that to some extent true, that for the first time you have fossil fuels included in the text. In Glasgow, which is the 2 COPs before 26, we only managed to put coal there. They don't want to talk about fossil fuels. So it was the first COP that you have fossil fuels in the text. However, given the deals that happened in the 2 weeks, the UAE consensus is actually, we can say, that that result is what the oil companies wanted. No matter that, it doesn't matter that during the talks, the EU and the US and the UK actually wanted fossil fuel phase out. But then, the irony of that and the contradiction of that is they don't want to put any means of implementation. You can't have fossil fuel phase out if you don't want to give extra private finance, if you don't want to share your technology. And this I will go back on the discussion on just transition. The thing is, there are 2 types of conflict in the just transition. You have an interstate conflict, wherein the different states would have different agenda when it comes to transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy or increasing the energy mix. You have the question of who should do the phase out first, who should fund it, and who has the technology. So there's a big difference between, for example, the UK and Mali when it comes to who can afford it and who should do it first, and who controls the technology. The technology is also, apart from finance, which is very obvious, technology is also a very important matter. If you remember during COVID, when it's a life and death situation, companies don't want to share their technology. It is their precious, so they don't want to share it freely. So when it comes to a climate crisis, the companies that control the technology will not also give it away for free or as an activity of global solidarity. And then, of course, during the whole 2 weeks, there's always in the different streams of the negotiation, there was also an agenda to sort of do away with the common but differentiated responsibilities and common capacity, as if that framework, that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change were in, it was a key principle, doesn't exist. Or even the Paris Agreement. So they wanted to tone down that CBDR element. They wanted to tone down the question of equity, the question of international cooperation. And that also came back on the question on just transition. So for the first time, there was a process was started on just transition. And the meeting was very ad hoc. It was not even on the schedule until they announced there will be a meeting. So you really have to watch for the for the announcement. Talk to both co-chairs, so South Africa and Brazil at first, and then plus Norway and Germany. So this question of trying to do away with equity, trying to do away with international cooperation, because they're saying each country have the responsibility to do just transition. But then again, we'll go back to the interstate conflict. Well, first and foremost, it is the climate vulnerable countries who is responsible the least to this climate crisis, will be burdened by the cost of transition. And then, of course, you also have the debate on what will be the focus of the transition. Will it just be the energy transition? What about the labor component of it? What about the land use of it? Because even if the next day they all decide, okay, we'll do a shift to renewable energy, the question of where will those solar panels and windmills be put? Whose land will it be set on? In the UK, you have that silly argument that they don't want windmills in their backyard, so they all want it offshore. And in Africa, there's a huge battles on what land to use to put the solar panels. In Kenya, solar panel champions were being beaten up for just simply promoting. And I will also say that part of the contradiction is that on the energy perspective, it would be difficult to say that fossil fuels is just bad and fossil fuels is good, because you also have the question of what kind of company will it be? Because you have the example, for example, of Mexico, wherein all wind energy is owned by transnational corporations. While at the same time, you have countries that have their oil asset that are all national oil companies, because there's also that argument that you can't control something you don't own. So if you talk about just transition, you can't plan if you don't own your oil asset, if you don't own your gas asset, if the companies are all foreign. So there's also that question of who owns those and what are the means of implementation. And then at the same time, you also have the interclass conflict, because even in a country like the UK, there's a big difference between the rich, the top 10% of the population that uses more energy, emit more, who has their private jets to go to a party in Paris, and you have people who are dying of cold. In the first world, you have pensioners who are dying of pneumonia because they're so scared to turn on their heating in winter because they can't afford heating. So a lot of people are choosing between heating and eating. That's also because the energy system in the UK is also very, very problematic. We don't own. It is hosting the big 5 oil majors, but the government has no way of controlling them. So that's also a question when we talk about the just transition. So I think just to wrap up, if we look at the COP, there are some good things, there are many questionable things. On one part, of course, the big part is that loss and damage is now operational. But then, who will compose? What countries will be in the board? Will it just be 4 years? Because the World Bank also have a track record in the other programs and processes wherein it was a host of a certain project. They don't end up to be interim. They want to remain forever as a host. And then will it be, of course there are some elements that were introduced during the negotiation, like with the World Bank, they take as much as between 17 to 20% cut on the fund that they handle. And the developing countries say, well, if they end up managing, just say 100 million, then you will get 20% cut of that, which could have done a lot in a country that needed it the most, and not just to pay staff of the World Bank. Well, because when you host it, when the World Bank hosts it, that means its staff will staff it. So part of that money of loss and damage will pay the staff of the World Bank. And of course, when we talk about World Bank, the salary and the perks of their officials is different if say if the loss and damage will be hosted by UNEP or any other or intergovernment or create a new intergovernment body. When it comes to the question of the global stock take, although in the text they did say there's a lot that needs to be done, but in the content and the spirit of the text in the end is that, yeah, you recognize there's a lot that needs to be done, but actually this will not do much. So there's an acknowledgement that there are shortcomings. Many of the nationally determined contribution will not amount to keeping the 1.5, which they call the North Star. Yeah, you have a North Star, but it's all clouded with all these false solutions and with all the requirements that will not be met. And climate finance, it's not increasing. Even the $100 billion promised in Copenhagen, they said it's almost there, but not yet there. Maybe 2025. It was supposed to be 2020. First and foremost, the history of the COP, let's not forget. It's the history of delay, of having a decision, and then after 5 years, forget about those decisions or change those decisions or move the landmark further, kick the can down the road, and at the same time, false solutions. So part of the the fossil fuel question is that if it's full of false solution, then it will be impossible to do the phase out. Because in the first place, the phase out should have been discussed 20 years ago. The fast tracking of transition to renewable energy should have happened 30 years ago. So now that it's late, then they should have do 5 times more of the effort, commensurate funding to do the transition. But they're not prepared to do that. And on the question of where will finance come from, for us, our campaign is make polluters pay as well. Because if we look at the quarterly profits of the big 5, your eyes will water. Just the 2022, they earned 200 billion altogether, just the big 5. And their plan as well is to reinvest and give their stock, their shareholders, because they have a fiduciary duty to make their shareholders rich. So that's a different aspect. Of course, that's a different aspect as well. But with the question of where will the money come from? There's in Europe, the focus of the campaign is how to make those corporations pay, and not just a windfall tax, but how do you make it regular? ATTAC has done this before, all this campaign. So also part of the ATTAC network. Many of those following tax justice, economic justice campaigns are pushing for this, making polluters pay. And then, of course, in the national level, how would you ensure that you have a robust 3-year, 5-year plan for that transition? I think I will end here.